The 1960s and 1970s were decades that defined rock and roll in ways that still reverberate through modern music. At the heart of this revolution were the electrifying guitar riffs that not only drove the sound of the genre but also became the very essence of its identity. These riffs, bold, distorted, melodic, and often rebellious, captured the raw energy, emotional intensity, and spirit of the times, becoming iconic signatures that continue to inspire musicians and fans worldwide. The electric guitar was more than an instrument in the hands of legends like Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Keith Richards, and Eric Clapton. It was a weapon for self-expression, a tool for cultural change, and the driving force behind some of the most unforgettable anthems in rock history. From the fiery solos that would become the hallmark of the genre to the unforgettable rhythm riffs that set the foundation for countless rock hits, the guitar riffs of the 60s and 70s shaped the landscape of rock and roll forever. In this article, we'll explore the electrifying riffs that defined rock and roll from the 1960s and 1970s, breaking down their impact on the music scene and their enduring legacy. We'll take a deep dive into the sounds that defined the era, the artists who created them, and how these riffs continue to influence the music of today. The birth of the guitar hero. 1960s innovations. The 1960s marked a turning point in rock music, where the electric guitar transitioned from a rhythm instrument to the lead voice of rock and roll. The pioneering riffs of the era were not just technical feats, they were emotional outbursts, conveying a sense of rebellion, excitement, and self-expression. This was the decade when the electric guitar was truly electrified. Chuck Berry and the birth of rock riffs. While the 60s would come to define the electric era of rock, much of the groundwork had already been laid by early rock and roll pioneers like Chuck Berry. Though Berry's most influential riffs predated the 60s, his groundbreaking work in the late 1950s, like Johnny B. Good, 1958, became a blueprint for what would come in the 60s. The infectious and instantly recognizable riff of Johnny B. Good defined the essence of rock music, a driving, rhythmic hook that propelled the music forward and left an indelible mark on generations of guitarists to come. His use of double stops, playing two notes simultaneously, and his innovative phrasing became a staple of rock and roll guitar. The influence of Chuck Berry's riffs can be traced directly to the 60s guitar icons who would push the boundaries of what the electric guitar could do. The rise of the British invasion. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones. In the early 1960s, rock music underwent a transformation thanks to the British invasion, where British bands brought a fresh, energized take on rock and roll. Among the most iconic riffs of the 60s were those created by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The Beatles, who initially found their sound through covers of American rock classics, soon began to shape their own revolutionary style. George Harrison's riff on I Feel Fine, 1964, is one of the first instances of the guitar being used as a hook, a technique that would become a defining feature of pop and rock music for decades to come. Harrison's feedback-based introduction to I Feel Fine is often cited as one of the earliest examples of guitar feedback being used intentionally in a song, contributing to the sound that defined much of the 60s. Meanwhile, the Rolling Stones brought a much grittier, blues-infused style of rock to the forefront. Keith Richards' riff on I Can't Get No Satisfaction, 1965, is one of the most iconic and widely recognized riffs in rock history. Richards' simple, yet infectious, riff is a perfect example of how less can often be more. Its repetitive nature helped create a sense of urgency and frustration, mirroring the themes of the song itself. The riff became a rallying cry for a generation seeking rebellion and release. The explosion of psychedelia and classic rock, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, and the Who. The mid-60s through the early 70s was a period of radical experimentation and exploration in rock music. The introduction of psychedelic music, the development of new guitar techniques, and the search for new sonic landscapes gave birth to some of the most innovative riffs in rock history. Guitarists pushed the boundaries of distortion, feedback, and tonal exploration, creating sounds that were as much about feeling and texture as they were about melody. Jimi Hendrix, the virtuoso of sound without a doubt. Jimi Hendrix remains one of the most influential guitarists of all time, and his riffs are often seen as the defining sounds of the 60s and 70s. His unparalleled ability to manipulate the electric guitar, creating sounds that seem to transcend traditional rock music, made his riffs iconic and revolutionary. Hendrix's Purple Haze, 1967, is often considered one of the greatest riffs in rock history. Its combination of fuzzed-out distortion, bends, and harmonic overtones created a sound that was raw, untamed, and experimental. The riff became a hallmark of Hendrix's style, where he didn't just play notes, he manipulated the guitar itself, bending its voice to his will. Another iconic Hendrix riff, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, 1968, remains a quintessential example of the riff's identity. The muscular, staccato riff sets the tone for the entire song, its bluesy yet psychedelic quality making it one of the most memorable guitar lines in rock history. Eric Clapton and Cream. Blues meets rock. Eric Clapton emerged as another pivotal figure in the 60s and 70s, blending blues with rock and creating riffs that were deeply emotive, technical, and groundbreaking. As a member of Cream, Clapton's riff on Sunshine of Your Love, 1967, became one of the defining sounds of the late 60s. The slow, almost languid riff, with its deep, groovy feel, played a major role in shaping the sound of hard rock and blues rock that would continue to develop into the 70s. The riff of Sunshine of Your Love was influential because it was the epitome of Clapton's ability to fuse raw emotion with technical mastery. His use of bends and vibrato, along with the song's distinct minor key tonality, contributed to the track's dark, haunting atmosphere, making it a cornerstone of classic rock guitar. The 70s. Hard rock and arena rock dominance. By the 1970s, rock and roll had evolved into larger-than-life arena spectacles. With the rise of hard rock and the increased popularity of arena rock, guitar riffs became even more powerful and anthemic. The focus shifted toward riffs that could fill stadiums, with bigger sound, longer solos, and more complex compositions. Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page's masterpieces. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin became the face of hard rock, known for his complex riffs that were both technical and emotional. Whole Lotta Love, 1969, while released at the tail end of the 60s, is perhaps one of the most well-known and influential riffs of the 70s, with its pounding, syncopated rhythm, bluesy bends, and distinct fuzz tone. Page's riff in Whole Lotta Love serves as the foundation for the entire track, and its influence can be heard in nearly every heavy rock riff that followed. Page's skillful use of modal scales, exotic tunings, and experimental effects made him a pioneer of guitar technique. Another example of his riff mastery can be heard in Black Dog, 1971, where the unusual time signatures and intricate patterns elevated the art of riff writing to new heights. Deep Purple. The birth of heavy metal. If Led Zeppelin was pioneering heavy rock, then Deep Purple was laying the foundation for heavy metal. Ritchie Blackmore, the lead guitarist, is often credited with some of the most powerful and energetic riffs in early metal. His riff on Smoke on the Water, 1972, is arguably one of the most iconic guitar riffs of all time. Simple yet monumental, the riff has transcended the genre and is recognized by almost anyone, regardless of their musical background. The riff's use of power chords and the distinct intervallic jumps became a staple for future metal bands, and Smoke on the Water remains a defining track of the 70s, influencing everything from stadium rock to the nascent heavy metal movement. The evolution of guitar riffs into the 80s and beyond, while the 60s and 70s undeniably laid the groundwork for modern rock guitar riffs, the influence of these iconic riffs continued to echo into the 1980s and beyond. As music technology advanced, so did the possibilities for creating new and innovative sounds. Yet, even as new genres emerged and guitar techniques evolved, the foundational riffs of the 60s and 70s remained touchstones for future generations of guitarists. The rise of heavy metal and the 80s guitar explosion. By the early 1980s, the hard rock scene had evolved into a more aggressive and polished sound, with the emergence of heavy metal and hair metal. The influence of 70s bands like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath was undeniable, but the next generation of guitarists, such as Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, and Tony Iommi, took things even further. Eddie Van Halen's iconic riff in Jump, 1984, is a perfect example of the 80s guitar explosion. Known for his groundbreaking techniques like two-handed tapping and harmonic diving, Van Halen revolutionized rock guitar in ways that mirrored the revolutionary spirit of the 60s and 70s. His ability to combine technical skill with melody, all while maintaining a sense of excitement and raw energy, helped solidify Van Halen as one of the greatest guitarists of the 80s. Meanwhile, Randy Rhoads, playing with Ozzy Osbourne, brought classical influence into metal with riffs that were both virtuosic and melodic. Songs like Crazy Train, 1980, showcased Rhoads' impeccable technique and his ability to blend classical scales with the heaviness of metal, creating a riff that became an anthem for an entire generation of fans. However, despite the rise of new guitar heroes and cutting-edge techniques, the roots of rock and roll could still be felt. The simplistic yet powerful nature of early riffs, like Jimmy Page's in Whole Lotta Love, or Chuck Berry's in Johnny B. Good, remained a guiding light for musicians. The evolution of riffs through the 80s continued to rely on those primal elements of rock, power, rebellion, and emotional connection. The lasting legacy of 60s and 70s guitar riffs in modern music, even in the 21st century, the electrifying riffs of the 60s and 70s continue to shape contemporary music. Bands across various genres, from indie rock to heavy metal to punk, still cite the legendary riffs of Jimi Hendrix, Keith Richards, and Jimmy Page as major influences on their own work. These riffs remain staples in the repertoire of guitarists, guitar teachers, and music fans alike. Modern rock bands channeling the spirit of the 60s and 70s even as the digital age has reshaped the music industry. Many contemporary rock bands still pay homage to the revolutionary sounds of the 60s and 70s. For example, the British rock band The Black Keys has gained a reputation for their blues-infused rock sound, often drawing directly from the primal energy of early blues rock riffs, reminiscent of Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. The riff in their hit, Lonely Boy, 2011, channels the stripped-down power of early rock, while still maintaining a modern, gritty edge. Similarly, Greta Van Fleet, a band often compared to Led Zeppelin, takes inspiration from the heavy, blues-driven riffs of the 70s. Their breakout track, Safari Song, 2017, features a riff that recalls the thundering, powerful energy of Zeppelin, with vocalist Josh Kiska's delivery bringing a new generation's voice to a classic rock sound. The garage rock revival of the early 2000s, led by bands like The Strokes and the White Stripes, also brought back a raw, unpolished sound reminiscent of the early rock and roll era. The Strokes' riff in Last Night, 2001, is an echo of the simplicity and catchiness that defined much of the 60s and 70s. The White Stripes' Seven Nation Army, 2003, is a prime example of how modern bands can create riff-driven anthems that still pay tribute to the bold, stripped-down sound of the past. Guitar-driven genres in the digital age. The digital age has dramatically altered how music is produced, but guitar-driven music continues to thrive in many genres. While genres like EDM and hip-hop may dominate the charts, there is still a strong market for guitar-based music. Modern rock, indie, and metal bands continue to use electric guitar riffs to make an emotional connection with their audiences. Post-punk revival bands like Interpol, The Killers, and Franz Ferdinand continue to emphasize sharp, catchy guitar riffs, reminiscent of the angular, minimalist sound of the 70s punk rock scene. Even in genres like metalcore and post-hardcore, the energy and technicality of 70s heavy metal riffs remain a strong influence. Moreover, the rise of guitar-driven electronic music and synthwave genres has seen the guitar return to prominence, albeit in a more synthesized form. Bands like Tame Impala and MGMT combine the lush soundscapes of 70s rock with modern electronics, often incorporating guitar riffs and solos that channel the spirit of classic rock with a contemporary twist. The power of riffs in today's music industry. The riff still plays a pivotal role in the music industry today. It remains the hook, the calling card, the entry point for listeners into a song's world. Whether it's the blistering solos in a hard rock track, the tight grooves in an indie song, or the chunky rhythms in metal, the riff continues to be a core element of rock music. Even songs that might seem more polished or electronic in nature often find their strength in a powerful guitar riff, whether it's played on an acoustic guitar, distorted through an amplifier, or produced electronically. With the resurgence of live music in recent years, the importance of iconic riffs has only been amplified. Festivals, stadium concerts, and intimate live shows still feature those unforgettable moments when the crowd erupts at the first few notes of a familiar riff. The power of these riffs to unite audiences, spark memories, and stir emotions is an enduring legacy that can be traced back to the 60s and 70s. The timeless power of the rock and roll riff, the electrifying guitar riffs of the 60s and 70s were more than just musical hooks, they were cultural symbols. They were sonic representations of rebellion, freedom, and the unrelenting desire to express emotion and individuality. These riffs laid the foundation for all rock music that followed, from the power of the Beatles' jangly chords to the heavy, fuzzed-out grooves of Jimi Hendrix to the bluesy, gritty licks of the Rolling Stones. Even as music continues to evolve, the influence of these legendary guitar riffs remains undeniable. They are timeless. They connect generations of music lovers, from those who were there at the birth of rock and roll to those discovering its electrifying power for the first time. The riffs of the 60s and 70s continue to shape the sound and spirit of modern rock, ensuring that their legacy will never fade. Rock and roll may have changed in form and style, but its heart, beating in every unforgettable riff, remains the same.